Alrighty, folks, this is my first time doing a recording. Feels a little weird not having you all in Twitch chat with me. I apologize that we had some internet issues today. I'm going to figure it all out. I'm going to take tomorrow and Saturday to figure it out. So I'm going to walk through all the material as though you were here, although it's going to be very lonely. That way you all have something to watch and you can get caught up on the things we wanted to talk about today. Mainly working through the layouts and things like that. So I'm going to record them. This will go faster, I guess, because I'm not kind of interacting with chat. And what I think you all can do is kind of just follow along at your own leisure. And then when it gets to lab time, just pause, work on the lab, and then restart it. This will be posted on YouTube, but I'll also put it on Discord and everything so everybody knows that it's live. All right, folks, let's go ahead and I'm going to kill the music and switch over to Little Leon. All right, let's start working through this stuff. So we're going to talk about a few things tonight. I'm going to scroll through here. Cover the CSS fundamentals again. We're going to cover the box model. We're going to go over float. We're going to work through our 3 simple layouts. We're going to learn the basics of responsiveness, what it means to have a responsive website, and then cover a little bit of flexbox, and then I'll leave you all with some homework. So let's push through. No questions. Oh, this is so sad. This is so different without you all here. I really don't like this. I really miss you all. Please stop by office hours on Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. I would love to spend some more time with y'all, answer some of your questions. Hopefully this works well, this makes sense, but always hit me up on Discord. Stop by the office hours if you have questions. All right, so the golden rule. Remember, we don't put HTML in our CSS or CSS in our HTML or mix JavaScript in between any of them. We keep our concerns separate, right? HTML is just for our content. CSS is just for our style. JavaScript is just for our behavior and interaction, okay? And we do this to stay organized. We do this so that when we're working with teams and another member on the development team says, go fix this, or where can I find that? You know where to direct them to fix or find things, right? It helps with organization. All right, well, if we can't mix everything in, then we need a place to put our CSS. It's not going to be inline. It's not going to be in the head. It's going to be in a separate file, right? And so we would go ahead and put that in a separate file, and then we'll link our HTML to our CSS with a link tag in the head of our HTML so we can keep our HTML separate from our CSS. What is this? This is a rule. Normally we play the game where we figure out what each thing is, but remember, the whole thing is a rule. A rule is broken up into 2 big pieces or 2 main parts, a selector and a declaration block. Then that declaration block is broken up into declarations, and declarations are broken up into properties and values, right? Whole thing's a rule, selector, declaration block, declarations, properties, and values. We reviewed this quite a few times now, so just trying to keep the repetition going so that it's a little bit easier to retain onto the information. Forget that forgetting curve, right? So that we can keep the forgetting curve from getting too steep, keep it nice and shallow. Remember, you should be using Anki or some sort of tool for spatial repetition, so all these little things you don't forget over time. All right, remember, our CSS is read from top to bottom, right? That means any rules that come below can override the rules that come above if they have the same or greater specificity. If something comes below, further down the cascade, further down in our CSS file, we actually won't have the ability to override what comes above if it doesn't have the same or greater specificity. So you have to have the same point values or more, or else those rules won't take effect. All right, we talked about some relationships. And there are kind of 2 key relationships that we've talked about, parent-child and siblings. Parent-child relationships are denoted either via a space or a right caret. When you have the right caret, that means a direct child, right? Meaning that something that's 1 level in, right? You are the direct child of your mom and dad, but you are a child of your grandparents, right? This case, we're talking about mom to child. All right, talking about 1 level deep. If there is anything else deeper, this rule would not apply. All right. Now we also have space. And this is another parent-child selector, but this child could be as deep as you want it, right? So in this case, we have a paragraph that's inside of an article. That article is inside of a section, right? So that's 2 layers deep. It works. The space doesn't care about how deep it is. Doesn't matter if it's a great grandchild or more. This would work. So both for parent-child, one means immediate child, one means any child further down in the code. All right, we also have sibling selectors. For when elements are at the same level, they're both inside of the same containing element, you can select them by their sibling that comes immediately before. So when I have P plus P, what I'm really saying is, all right, find a paragraph whose sibling immediately before it was also a paragraph. And that would color hello YouTube red. Hello YouTube. Cool. I'm moving through this at a pretty quick pace. We've already covered all of this material in the past couple of classes. If you're playing catch up, all the previous classes are on YouTube. Feel free to go through them. You can always change up the speed too, make it go a little bit slower, make it go a little bit faster if you want to review content. Keep that in mind. All right. We have the nested selectors, but we can also get a little bit more specific. We have IDs. IDs are unique identifiers, right? You can give an element an ID, and that targets that element and only that element. So each element can have one ID, and then that ID cannot be reused anywhere else. So this paragraph has the ID of zebra. Nothing else can now have that ID. It will forever be just that paragraph that can have that ID zebra. Also, that paragraph can't have another ID. The ID is a unique identifier that enables me to target that paragraph and only that paragraph. Cool. A little bit different is classes. Classes, you can have multiple per element, and those classes can be applied to as many elements as you want. I like to think about classes in terms of Leon, right? So myself, I have a class of Batman shirt, I have a class of glasses, and I have a class of fabulous hair. Right. Now, could other people have a Batman shirt, glasses, and fabulous hair? Yes. You could apply those classes to multiple individuals. But right now I have all 3 of those classes. So classes can be applied to many. They're not unique. An ID is unique, but classes are not. All right. We played the specificity game a little bit on stream. I think we got through it before the lag started. But here is some HTML and a CSS rule below. Let's count up the amount of points of specificity that we have. If you're following along on YouTube, pause it. Gave you a little bit of pause there. And try and guess no, I guess I should have waited until I told the rules, right? Go ahead and when I'm done, pause me and then figure out how many points of specificity there exist in this selector here. So go ahead, calculate it. I'll give you a second. All right, welcome back. You got it. Well done. Congrats. I'm trying to mimic the interaction I normally have on Twitch. This is very lonely. I'm hoping you all stop by on Saturday, and then I get to see you again on Tuesday. All right, so if we did the counting right, we would have 10 points for the class, 1 point for the span, 1 point for the paragraph, so that's 12 points so far, and then 100 for pizza, so that's 112 points of specificity for this rule, and specifically that selector. Let's look at the next one. You're going to do the same thing, calculate the number of points of specificity. I'll give you a second to do it and then come back. Welcome back. Here we have, let's count them out. 10 points. Whoop. Ooh, I scrolled. How do I undo that? I don't know what I just did. All right, let's go back to presenting these. That was weird. There we go. Okay. So I have this selector here. How many points of specificity is it? Let's count. We have 10, 20, 30, 31, 131. All right, we have 131 points of specificity. 10 points comes from each class. 1 point comes from the regular tag, and then 100 comes from the ID of Diet Coke. One more. Let's do one more. All right, here we go. We have again some HTML, some CSS, and let's count out the specificity. I'll give you a second to do it. Welcome back. All right, let's count out the specificity here. This one's a little bit of a trick. You have 10, 20, 30, 130 points of specificity, right? But we also have the important. So it's 1,130 points of specificity. Well done. Let's just go back and make sure those are all correct. We have 10, 2, 12, 112, 10, 20, 30, 1, 131, and then 10, 20, 30, 130, 1,130 points of specificity. Well done, everybody. Last class, we spent significant time talking about the box model, right? So the box model, remember, is each element is a box. It can get height and width from the content inside of it, or you can give it a specific height and a width. So here I have an element that has a height and a width. It has some padding and then a border after the padding. Remember, the padding increases the distance between the element and its border. And then we have margin, which is the bully that can push all of this around. All right, so in the starter code today, if you're following along and you just found us on YouTube, you can go to our Discord channel. So you can just do leonnoel.com/Discord. It'll take you to Discord, and once you agree to all the rules, there's a follow along materials channel where you can grab all the materials that you need. And then what's going to happen is that you can use those materials as we get to the specific sections in the video. So I am going to open up the starter code from today that was for the box model. Let me go ahead and open up the desktop here. 1 second. So it's the materials from class 6. And in those materials, you're going to have 3 folders that look like this. So you're going to have a box model practice, flexbox example, and a template. So I'm going to open up the box model practice in Atom. I'm going to drag that along, open it in Atom. And there we go. So there are 4 questions here that you're going to work through. And so I'm going to work through those questions right now. But if you're following along, pause the video here, complete the questions, and then come back when you're done. I'll be waiting. Welcome back. Let's go ahead and work through these questions together. I am going to copy what I have here in the HTML, and I'm just going to make these comments in my CSS. So I'm just going to copy. I'm going to open up my CSS, and oh, forgot the CSS. Delete the CSS here. There we go. And I'm going to paste these in. I'm going to highlight them all and make them a comment. Cool. Please give the H1 some padding. So let's go ahead and do that. H1. Let's do some padding on 3 sides. So remember, when you're applying padding, you can do top, right, bottom, left. All right. So it's clockwise. It's always clockwise. Same thing for margin. Top, right, bottom, left. You can do padding bottom, padding top, padding left, padding right, and they can all be 4 separate things. But you can also just use the notation that gives you access to all 4 in one declaration. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do padding, and then I'm going to say, all right, padding on 3 sides. Let's do top. Let's do left, top, and bottom. Nothing on the right. So I'm going to do 10 pixels of padding on top. I'm going to do 0 pixels of padding on the right. Let's do 12 pixels of padding on the bottom, and let's do 20 pixels of padding on the left. Cool. Let's do margin on just one side. All right, so let's do margin left here. So I could use that same notation for margin, or I could do this singular line. So I'm going to do margin left of, let's see. Let's do something so big so we can see it, like 100 pixels. All right, so we have 100 pixels there. Woo. Awesome. What else do we do? Add a light purple background with a light blue lettering. Okay. Light purple background with light blue lettering. So I'm going to do background. Normally I would ask you all, hey, what color did you use for light purple? Let's just try light purple. Let's see if that does anything. And then light blue lettering. So we're going to do font color, or we can just do color, sorry. Color, let's do light blue. Let's see if these work at all. I'm going to save this. I'm going to open this file in the browser and see what we get. All right, let's make sure we have everything going there. It doesn't like my colors. So that light blue, that light purple, it doesn't like it. This is where I miss you all so much. You would have given me the RGB values, the HSLA values. Let's do purple for now. We'll do blue for now, and we can look those up later. All right, let's save it. Let's go back. Let's refresh. Boom, there you go. We got some blue and some purple. If you wanted to, you could look up those RGB values, those hexadecimal values, whatever you would like to do to get those colors. Let's go back. Please give the H2 significant padding on the top and bottom. So let's do that. H2. Let's do padding. I'm going to use the shortcut again. Significant. What's significant? Let's do 100 pixels. 100 pixels on the top. Let's do 0 pixels on the right. 100 pixels on the bottom. And then 0 pixels on the left. And we actually don't need to say pixels with 0, so we can just do 0. Like that. And then the interesting thing is I've repeated myself here. So there's another cool trick when it comes to padding and margin, is that if you're going to repeat the same two things, you can actually shorten it to just 2. And then it'll do 100 on the top, 0 on the right, 100 on the bottom, and 0 on the left. Cool. Just like if we just did 100, it would do 100 on all sides. So 1 repeats on all sides, 2 repeats once more. Cool. Let's see what else we got here. Dark green border on the top and bottom. So this is a tricky one. So we can just do border top, and we can do, let's do like 3 pixels solid green, and then we can do border bottom as well. And let's do 3 pixels solid green, and now we should have a border just on top and bottom, and then an orange background. So let's do background of orange. Cool. Let's save this. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like in the browser. And I'm going to give it a good old refresh. And there we go. So you have significant padding on the top and bottom. We got our lovely green borders and the orange background. That's looking good. All right, let's keep pushing here. We have, all right, give the give the section a thick blue border, a height of 300 pixels, and more than 400 pixels of margin on the top. So let's work through this. We're going to give the section a blue border that's thick. All right, section. Let's go ahead and do, it doesn't say on any specific side, so we're just going to do border. Let's do thick, so we'll do like 10 pixels, solid blue. Cool. Let's give it a height of 300 pixels. Cool. And 400 pixels of margin, more than 400 pixels of margin on top. So let's do margin. Let's do margin. We don't have to do the, we can just do top, right? So we'll just do margin top. And we'll do more than 400 pixels, so we'll be cheeky and we'll say, let's do 401. Cool. Let's save it all up. Let's make sure it worked. Let's refresh. All right, so we can see all that lovely margin. It pushed the whole thing down. If we use the inspector tools, we should be able to see all this. So let me make the inspector just a little bit smaller. Let me scroll down here. There you go. There's the section. And we can see that like this orangey color that shows up there, that's the margin. And if we go and we scroll down here, we can actually see, all right, boom, there's 401 pixels of margin. That's it there. There's the border, there's the padding, and there's the actual element. So remember, those inspect tools are really helpful. You can just do right-click inspect in Chrome and get access to all of them. Cool beans. All right, let's close this. Let's go back. There was one more we had to do. Please make the spans have a thin yellow borders, equal padding and margin on all sides. So those are like inside elements. So let's go ahead and do span. And let's go ahead and do thin yellow borders. So I'm going to do border. I'm going to do 1 pixel just because I want it to be thin, solid, and yellow. And let's go ahead and do equal padding. So maybe let's do like 3 pixels of padding and then 3 pixels of margin. So padding, let's do 3px, and we'll put that on all sides. And the same thing with margin. We'll do 3px again. So remember, when you just have one value there, whether it's pixels, whether it's padding or margin, it's going to repeat on all 4 sides. So that's what we're doing there. It's repeating it on all 4 sides. All right. I think that's it. Let's save it. Let's go back. Let's make sure everything worked. And there we go. We can see our span's got that lovely little styling as well. Cool. Did you get it all? Did you get it right? Were you able to solve it all? If you're able to solve it all, leave a comment saying, I got it, right? We're going to add interactivity to this, even though we're not doing it live on Twitch. I want you in the comments to say whether or not you were able to finish this one on your own. Kudos to you if you were. Well done, even if you tried. All right, so that's a little bit of box model review. Let's take a look at some layouts. So the homework that was due today were these following layouts. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly code out these layouts so you have the solutions. And we're going to talk through some of the decisions I made. Remember, we're using floats here, right? And so floats might not be the best practice going forward, but it's where I like to start folks that are new. You can rely on maybe a little bit of math instead of a little bit of terminology that you might not know. And that makes it a little bit easier for folks just learning. If I was actually doing layouts, I'd probably be using flexbox and grid going forward in the future. But I think as a learning tool, floats can be pretty helpful. So we had 3 layouts that we had to use floats for. Remember, when you float content, it's trying to fight to get into a corner. So if I float something to the left, it's going to try and go all the way up as it can go, and all the way to the left as it can go, trying to get into that corner. If I float something to the right, it's going to go all the way up as much as it can go, and then all the way to the right as much as it can go, trying to get into that corner. So the hack here is that if we float stuff to the left, they're all going to go up and then all stack next to each other horizontally. And so you can use floats as a means of doing layout, right? As a means of doing layout, because you can get stuff to sit next to each other. And that's kind of the trick folks use for quite a while. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at these layouts. We're going to code them together live. All right, here's the first layout. If I'm looking at this layout, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, here we go. Header, footer, and I don't have content, so I can't really figure out whether or not these are sections, divs, articles. It could be so many other things. But I'm just going to pretend that I do know, and I'm going to say these are all sections. So I'm going to have a header, a footer, and 5 sections. All right. What I'm looking at here, though, is if I'm thinking it out and I'm planning this, I'm going to say this is 33%, and all of these will be the same, and then I'll say 50% for these 2. That'll be with 4 decimal places, though, because that's how much CSS can take. Cool. So let's try coding this out. I'm going to use the template that I gave you last class, and the template's also in today's starter materials as well. If you're kind of skipped ahead a little bit, if you want the materials, go ahead and get the materials on our Discord channel. Just go to leonnoel.com/Discord. There, once you get all the rules, you can get all the materials in the follow along channel. Cool. So I'm going to open up that template, and I'm going to put that code in there, and we're going to code it out live. All right, here we go. So I'm going to do all the things we just talked about. Header. Then we had 5 sections. And I'm not going to put anything in between these, so I'm just going to put them all on the same line. It's kind of like a pet peeve of mine when if you don't have any content in, just to put them on one line. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm just going to paste it 4 more times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have our footer. Cool. There we go. So that should do it. I think those bottom 2 I want to differentiate in some way, so I'm going to give those 2 a class. I'm going to say class equals, let's do class equals bottom. Cool. I'll do the same thing on this section down here. So class equals bottom. Cool. Let's save it all up. And then what I can do is now I can go to my CSS. I want to start writing those styles. So the first thing we're going to do is I have this layout area here. I know my header and footer are going to be pretty similar, so I'm going to use this comma. What the comma does is that enables me to write 2 rules for the price of 1, right? Since I'm going to repeat myself, we talked about, remember, do not repeat yourself. Keeping your code dry is one of the really first early tenements you got to stick to as a developer. And so since my footer and header are going to be almost exactly the same, I'm going to go ahead and just style them the same and use this comma to separate out my selectors, but apply the same style to both of those elements. So I'm going to go ahead and give them a height of 100 pixels, and then I'm going to give them a border. Do 1 pixel, solid, black. Cool. So that's the header and footer. Then we had sections, and so I'm going to say all my sections are going to have pretty much similar styles. I'm going to give them all a height of 200 pixels. I'm going to give them all a border. And we'll do the same thing, 1 pixel, solid, black. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll give them a width to start of 33% with the 3 decimal places, because I know that those top 3 I'm going to have to sit next to each other. This is applying to all 5 sections, but I'll use the cascade to my benefit here. I'll write the class after that'll get them to sit next to each other. Cool. And then I need to float them. Because remember, if I don't float them, they won't sit next to each other happily. So what that should do is it should make all the sections try sitting next to each other. And if we save it and we look at it, we'll probably be like close. So let me go ahead and open it in the browser. So we have like our 3 sections up here. We have some breaking down. So let's go ahead and get those last 2 sections in the spot where I want them. So let's go ahead and give that class here. So we can do the class. We'll just do bottom. And we'll do width of 50%. So it'll take us all the way, like the first 3 will be that 33%. But then the last 2 that have that bottom class, they're now 50%. So they get all the stuff that came above in this section due to the cascade, right? We get all those wonderful goodies. But the thing that changes is that those last 2 will go from 33% to 50% due to the cascade. So let me save. Let me go back. Let me refresh. All right, it's looking decent. It looks like we have a slight problem with our footer coming up. And so let's go ahead and deal with that footer. Let me check to make sure everything looks good. So we have our header that opens, section, 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 our 2 bottom sections, and then our footer. We saw that that footer is sliding up. Like if I go back and I inspect, right? Let's go ahead and inspect element. I can see that that footer slid up, right? I see all my other content that's down here. But this footer slid on up. And so what I want to do is I want to stop that footer from sliding up. And the reason it's sliding up is because the content above it is floating. So imagine my top hand is the sections above and my bottom hand is the footer. When I floated those 3 sections off the page, the footer slid up underneath. That's what happened, just slid right underneath. So there's 2 ways to solve this. You can also float the footer and they'll float together and stay in the same level, or you can use clear. Okay, and so I'll use clear. I'm going to do clear both. And what clear both does is kind of like crossing the street. It's saying look to the left, look to the right, make sure there's nothing floating. So let me go ahead and do clear both here. Clear both. And I don't really care that it's on the header. It's really just for the footer here. But that footer is now going to look to the left, look to the right, make sure there's nothing above it, and stay below the floated content. Could have also floated it if I wanted to. Remember, we also have some of our other stuff up here, our box model hack, and some just other goodies I've given you in this template to make sure all things you're good to start. All right, let's go back. Let's refresh. And it looks like we're pretty close. Looks like we have some overlap though, right? It looks like that we have this third section. If we inspect it, right, this third section, it should be sitting up here next to this other element up here. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that it has all the space it needs. So let's go back and take a look. let's go ahead and just do 33%. Let's save it. Let's go back. Let's refresh. All right. Looks good. And it looks like our last two are just not happy sitting next to each other. Looks like we have some issues going on with some missing, like the box model hack's not applying. Oh, our box model hack is incorrect. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. Let's bring back the 33%. And let's fix this box model hack. Let's just do box size. Let's drop the Moz prefix here. Let's do box sizing border box. That Moz prefix would only work with Firefox. We're not running Firefox, we're running Chrome. So let's go ahead and fix that. Box sizing border box. That's all you need now. You don't need those vendor prefixes anymore. What I think I did is I tried to delete the vendor prefixes and forgot that one. So if you're following along with the template, you're going to have to delete that for the box model to work. So let's go ahead and go back, and everything should be nice and neat now. There we go. So we have all three of them sitting next to each other and the two in the bottom sitting next to each other. And so the reason we saw that little bit of error was because the box model hack wasn't correct. So I'll go ahead and fix that and re-upload the starter material so that that doesn't trip anyone up. Cool, folks. Let's keep pushing. Let's look at the next layout. Layout 2 was, let's say this is a header, a section, an aside, a section, and a footer. Let's do that. So let's go back to our HTML. I'm going to use the same template. Let me actually make a copy, though. Let me make a copy here. I'm going to close this one. I'm going to make a copy of the template, and I'm going to make it just so I can share all of the answers with you. I'm just going to call this one Layout 2. All right, so I have a Layout 2 template now that I'm going to open up. Let me close this template. So I'm just going to go ahead and open that and add them. All right, here we go. Now remember we said our header and footer are still pretty much the same. We had that first section. Then let's get rid of the other ones. So let's get rid of these down here. So we had a section on the top. We're just going to say an aside. Like once again, we don't have the content to know if it's really an aside or not. You could have also just done another section here, but just to switch it up a little bit, I'm going to throw an aside in here. So header and footer can stay the same. Our section needs to be 100% width though. So let's go to our CSS. Our box model hack is correct now. Header and footer can stay the same. Section, let's make sure that they are 100% width, just so that it's nice and neat. 100% width. And then we need something for the aside. So let's do a aside. And the aside is going to need a height, a border, a width, all that good stuff. The width of the aside, though, if we look at that layout, let's say like 3070. I don't have the exact, maybe 4060. Let's say 3070. So I'm going to make the width of the aside 30%. I'm going to give it a height of 200 pixels as well. I'm going to give it a border. Let's just do border 1 pixel, solid black. And then I am going to, let's see. It also has to be floated so they can sit next to each other, right? Say float left. And I think that's it. I think we have our 30%, our 200 pixels, our border looks good, and it's floated left. And then the last thing we have to do is that last section here. This last section has to be 70% width. So how can we target this section but not this first section? Now, targeting is the hard thing here. And so I think we can use a sibling selector to get that second section. I think if we did a side plus section, that grabs just this section. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's do a side plus section. That should just grab that last section. And let's give it a width of 70%. And we only have to do 70, right? We only have to do 70%. And we don't have to do any of the other styles because it is going to inherit everything else from that section up above. So it is going to get all the goodies from that section above. And then we just need to change up the width at the bottom. Let's save this. Let's go ahead and open this in the browser. Make sure everything's looking good. All right, open in browser. There we go. I think that's pretty spot on. Like, if we look at this layout, header, main section, side section, footer. Like I said, you could have done 3 sections if you wanted to. Maybe just use the class to differentiate them, things like that. I think that looks good. All right, let's take a peek at the last layout. All right, I'm going to say all 3 of these are sections. Sorry, all 4 of these are sections, and this one's just going to have a class that makes it bigger. We'll call it big. So I'm going to go ahead and make another copy of the template. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a copy, and I am going to paste it, and I'm going to rename it to layout 3. That way, when you all are rewatching it, you have all these materials that I've worked through. And I'm going to go ahead and open layout 3 in Atom. Here we go. And we had a header, a footer, and there was 4 sections. So I'm just going to delete this bottom section, get rid of the class here. And it was the second section that we're going to call it like big. This is class equals big. There you go. And so I think we should be straightforward. We can open up our CSS. Let's keep the header and footer good. Our box model looks good. Header and footer looks good. Sections look good. I'm happy with like the 33%, but since we're dividing by 4, if we did it by 4, it'd be 25%. Remember, one has to be bigger than the others. So maybe let's what's an easy number, divide by 4. So if we did, let's see, 20 would be 80. What if we did something big? What if we did like how can I, let me look at this real quick to see how big I think it is. Let's do 70 and then like 10 10 10, just for easy maths, quick maths. So let's go ahead and make all the sections 10%. This is gonna be way too small. And then let's go ahead and do big was the name of our class, just to see it. Big be 70%. Whew. Let's save it. Let's go ahead and open this in the browser. There you go. So that's massive. Let's go ahead and pare this down. Let's make it 40. So let's make it 40. And then if it's 40, we have 60%, so we can do 60 divided by 3. Let's make them 20%. There we go. I like that. 20 would be 60, and then 40 would make it 100%. All right, let's do that. Let's go back. Let's refresh. There we go. I think that's pretty close to it. If we look, yeah, it's about the same. But these have more height. Let's give it a little bit more height. I like the height here. Let's go back, and let's give them a height of 400 pixels instead. Cool. Let's refresh. There we go. I think that's pretty spot on with the layout. And now we're starting to see kind of like how floats work, right? When it comes to floats, you just figure out the width in terms of percentage and you float them to the left. And that's kind of it. But you got to do the math. There are some quirks with like the clearing and knowing to use the box model hack. But once you know how to use the box model hack and you know that clear works, then you're pretty much off to the races. It's just width. You calculate all the percentages and you're good. When we get to flex, we're going to see that actually there's a way that you can do all this where you don't need to calculate the percentages. That's what flexbox is going to bring us. So we'll get to the magic in a second. Good stuff, folks. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and go back to the slides. And I know we're going a little bit faster through this material since there's no chat and I'm not answering your questions. We're kind of steaming through this. But hopefully we'll get all the internet issues fixed and we'll be back raring to go on Saturday and then back on Tuesday for JavaScript. I'm really excited. All right. Responsive website. So far we've made sites that look good on only really one device. We've just been using our main screen here. But we want to start being able to create websites that look good across all devices, right? Whether it's a mobile phone, whether it is a tablet, desktop, whatever you may call it. We want our sites to look good across all those sites. And so for a long time, none of this mattered, right? For a long time, you had what we call a fixed width website, where it was one size and that's it. It didn't work on mobile, it didn't work on tablet, it just was one size. And I remember when I was first creating one of my companies, we used, I think it was called 960 grid. It was like a Photoshop template where your whole site had to be 960 pixels wide. And that's kind of silly now because we wouldn't want a site that just stays 960 pixels. We'd want a site that kind of grows and shrinks based on what size screen we're using, right? And so that's where we come in with a fixed versus responsive. If you actually follow this UPS link in the slides, the Wayback Machine, what you're going to find is that if you go back to like 2017, so I'm not talking about like go back to like prehistoric internet times. I'm talking like go back just like a handful of years here. UPS still had a fixed width website. Like you would like open it up and it would just have this white space on the side. So this is something that's like still occurring. This shift is still happening. More and more companies are seeing the benefit of your content working really well across multiple devices. One of the folks I really liked that really made their site super responsive was Boston.com. If we look at Boston.com, they have a really responsive website. And we'll look what happens when I shrink the screen. So I go, and eventually most popular disappears. And then eventually this sidebar closes. And if I go even smaller, eventually it goes to all single column. So this site is working really well across not only mobile, tablet, desktop, right? It's working good across all those screens. And you have to stop and think. Why would Boston.com invest so heavily in their site being responsive? Because if you go back, their site wasn't always responsive, right? So you have to think about like why do they have such a beautiful responsive website? And you got to stop and ask yourself, like, what does Boston.com sell? Well, they're selling ads. And if you're going to sell ads, you need eyeballs. And if you want eyeballs, especially with news, your content better work on mobile, especially in a metro area, because while people are commuting, that's when they're checking the news. So if you want your content to be viewed, and that way you can serve up more ads, it needs to work well across a range of devices, right? This mobile explosion changed everything. The way people consume content on the internet is no longer sitting down at a desk and doing it that way. You're doing it on the go on a tablet and a mobile phone. And so you need a site that looks good across all those devices. And this is a really good example of a responsive website. No matter if I open up on my phone, my tablet, my desktop, it's going to look good. Cool. Now, when we start talking about responsive, there's a few things that makes a site responsive. Typically, we say it has a fluid and elastic underpinning, and you've made good content decisions, right? So these are three things that kind of come together to make a site nice and responsive. So let's break down what each of these things mean. Fluid means that everything is sized in a percentage. So we can actually take a look at that right now. Let me open back up one of our layouts here. These layouts were all done in width of percentages, right? So I believe we went with 20, 20, 20, and 40. Look what happens when I shrink this site. It's fluid. My screen size is getting smaller, but so is my layout. And the reason why that works is because it's widths of percentages. So as my viewport, or the size of my screen, gets smaller, the size of the page can get smaller along with it. If I had used pixel values, like if I had done a width of 400 pixels and a width of 200 pixels on all those, as I moved my window, nothing would have changed. So one of the cornerstones of a responsive website is a fluid underpinning, whether that's by widths that are in percentages or later down the line with things like flexbox. That flexibility of being able to resize your screen and have things shrink as you go along is really important. The other thing that we need to talk about are M's. M's are a way of having things respond in terms of the parent's font size. So an M, when you're talking about M's, what they really are just kind of like the square of the letter M at that font size. And that sounds like a really weird explanation. So what we're saying here is that you can size your content based on the current font size. And that seems weird at first, but what it enables you to do is you're not beholden to having a fixed size for all your content. It enables you to update your content based on different factors. So here's an example. We could write our font size on all of our paragraphs as, let's say, 16 pixels, right? But imagine you have a CSS document that's 3,000 lines long, and you're done. You feel really good about all the CSS you wrote, and you go up to your boss and you say, hey, I'm done everything. It looks good. And your boss goes, you know what? I love everything. I just wish everything was a little bit larger. Well, guess what? You're going to have to go through 3,000 lines of CSS, changing all your pixel values to be just a little bit larger. There's also a really big accessibility thing that comes into play. Folks are going to change the font size, the default font size of their browser. Individuals that have visual impairments might make the default font size of the browser a little bit bigger. If all your fonts, like paragraphs and spans and things like that, are forcing a certain pixel size, like 10 pixels, 12 pixels, right? The user doesn't have as much control over how those fonts are going to render. They're going to render 12 pixels regardless of what the user's kind of done. So we have this element called an M. And an M is a responsive unit of measure that you can use based on the parent's font size. So here, if I have a section, and on that section I've made the font size 20 pixels, well then 1M, this paragraph that's inside the section, 1M is now really worth 20 pixels. If I did 2Ms, that is 40 pixels. So a lot of people might put a base font size of 10 pixels so that the math is easy, right? So the cool thing here is, let's say I did my entire site in M's and I want to make the content a little bit bigger. Well, all I would have to do is edit that base font size to be a little bit larger, and then all my other styles will change. Like all my other paragraphs are now worth more. If I make that 20 to 25, now the worth of my M has also increased. So the beauty here is that with an M, it gives you a little bit more flexibility as you continue on. Like you're not hard coded into specific values. You can make one change that affects all your values going down your CSS file. It also gives folks a little bit more control when it comes to accessibility. One of the problems with M's though is that it will look at the parent's font size. So if you're working with a team and somebody else puts a different font size somewhere up the cascade, that might affect all your M's. So we got something called a rem. A rem is a root M. That root M will only ever look at the HTML element. It will never look at any other parent to dictate what its font size should be. So a lot of folks switch to rems because you can put one thing on your HTML element. The common one here is 62.5. The reason why you do 62.5 is because then you're using base 10 to count. So 1M is 10 pixels, 2Ms is 20 pixels, things like that. I actually believe it's 62.5 is tied to 1.6, which would make it because the default browser size is 16 pixels. Don't worry about the math for now. I think when you're first learning M's and Rems, the easiest thing to do is to set the font size to 10 pixels, and then 1M is 10 pixels, 2Ms is 20 pixels, 3Ms is 30 pixels. But if you're worried about kind of that accessibility piece, the common number here is 62.5 on the HTML element, and then everything uses that, and the math is a little bit easier. So long story short, right? I wish we were here live so I could answer questions and work through it. But come back on Saturday. I know this is a tricky topic. Come this Saturday for office hours. During office hours, you'll spend a lot more time working through M's and Rems. But the idea here is that we're not using strict pixel values, which means that as we shrink our screens, we can increase the font size, and all of our content can get bigger or smaller as we want it to be more flexible. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So we have a fluid underpinning, an elastic underpinning, and the last thing we have to really worry about are content decisions, right? So here on the left is the boston.com website, and that boston.com website still has this lovely right-hand column, right? We still have that column on the right. So when I'm at a larger screen size, let's say a desktop or a tablet, that column is still there. But when I get to mobile and I have less room, right? I don't have as much room as I have on tablet. What I can do is I can get rid of this content here. And then on mobile, I'm just showing the things people really care about. I'm just showing that the top stories, they're in a nice singular column. And so the last kind of big piece here for responsiveness is, all right, your site is fluid, meaning it's sized in percentages. It has an elastic underpinning, so things like fonts are sized in M's. And then the last thing we have to worry about is, all right, what kind of content do I want to show on mobile? What kind of content do I want to show on desktop, tablet? And there's two ways you can go. The first way is called mobile first, where you start with the mobile layout and you get larger, right? Or you can start with your desktop size and shrink it until things don't look good. And then when things don't look good, you redo it, right? So let's say we started with a desktop size, we could shrink it. Once we got to a smaller screen size and things started to get shrunk or scrunch and they weren't kind of where we needed them to be, we could then say, all right, we're going to change some content here. All right. Sorry, 1 second. Let me go ahead and do this here. All right. So let's say we have a normal website. Sorry, I'm going to redo that. I had a little distraction here off to the side. Let's say we had a normal website. We have a nice, lovely desktop size, right? What we want to do is, all right, I have this lovely desktop site. Let me shrink it until it looks bad. Maybe there's not enough room for something. Let me make some content decisions. Let me remove some stuff. Let me shrink it again until it looks bad, and then shrink it again until it looks bad, right? So these are two ways of going about making content decisions. You can either take what you have in desktop view and shrink it and remove the things that you don't like, or you start with this great idea called mobile first. And the reason why you might start mobile first is that you are forced to think about what is the most important content. What is the things that everyone's going to want? And then as I get to a larger screen size, I know I already have the most important content there. Now I'm just adding accessory content. So that's kind of one of the best things to think about. You can either go mobile first, or you can start with desktop and go down to mobile. Now, the tricky thing here is we're talking about content decisions. How do we make those content decisions? Like, how do we decide, how do we say, all right, remove this or add that? And that's where something called media queries comes into play. What media queries do is they enable us to load certain CSS styles at certain screen sizes. So at a certain screen size, it'll load this style. At a different screen size, we'll load a different one. So here I have a media query that is, what I'm saying here is between 0 and 600 pixels in width. I need you to load this H1 that's color blue. Sorry, 1 second. Fix my mic here. And so what I'm saying is only when I'm between 0 and 600 pixels am I going to load this H1. Okay? Any other time, that rule is not going to be applied. If I'm on a tablet that's 768 pixels wide, this H1 is not going to render in terms of it being color blue. Okay? So the cool thing here is we can actually add or remove content based on the screen size, right? So if I'm at a tablet size, I can go ahead, right, and say, these are the rules I want to load. When I'm on mobile, I can say, all right, here are the rules I want to load. When I'm on desktop, I can say, all right, here are the rules I want to load. And I have control over that via media queries. So if I'm talking about responsiveness, I can have, as long as I have a fluid underpinning, an elastic underpinning, and I can make content decisions, I can really make my site respond to any site that I want. And the key factor here is going to be these lovely, wonderful media queries. So what I would like to do is code one of these media queries together just so we can see it in action. And then I'll introduce Flex real quick, and then we'll call it a night. So I know we're going a little fast. That's all right. I don't have chat here to kind of help me through it. But what I'm going to do is, if you come by Saturday for office hours, we'll go through all this content again and make sure that it's okay. All right, let me go ahead and open up the media query code. So I'm just going to open up, let's do the first layout that we did. So I'm going to open that layout that we did first. All right, so here's my first layout. I'm going to open it in the browser. All right, here we go. We have a nice, lovely layout. The problem being here is that when I resize it, eventually I get to this point where this doesn't look that great. It's too squished. And so what I want to do is I want to make a rule that says, hey, when I get to like this mobile size, what I want to have happen is I want all of these sections to stack. Okay, I just want them to stack. So what I can do is I can write a media query that says, all right, when the screen is this size, do this rule. So let me bring it back to normal size. Let me go to my CSS and let me make sure I'm working on the right one here. Here we go. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to go down here to right where my CSS ends. And I'm going to write a media query here. So I'm going to do @media. So @media only screen, which is basically saying 0, and a min width hyphen width. And we're going to say, let's do like something like 600 pixels so I know that it works. We could go smaller, but my screen might not shrink that small. And let's start off with something easy. Let's do sections, and let's give them all a background of, let's say purple. Cool. So if this media query works, once my screen size gets to 600 pixels, this rule will come into effect. That section will come into effect, and it should make everything purple. All right, I'm saved up. Let me go back to the browser. Let me refresh. Oh no, it's already applied. All right, everything's just purple by default. I'm not at 600 pixels yet. It kind of just worked. Let's go ahead and take a peek at what we did. Oop, that's the wrong one. Let me close this one. All right. So here we go. We did @media only screen and min width 600 pixels. Oh, I said min. I meant to say max width. Because if I said min width, that means as long as we're above 600, this should work. All right. So let's do max width here. So max width is what we're looking for. So between 0 and max width is 600 pixels, it should make everything purple. So let me go ahead and save this. Let's go back. And when I refresh, there's no purple anymore, right? I had it as min width. We'll make it max width. Now, the cool thing is that rule's not being applied, not being applied, not being applied, not being applied, not being applied. Boom. Once we hit 600 pixels, that rule is now applied. If I go past 600 pixels, no longer applied. Below 600, applied. Above, no. Below, yes. Cool. So that's the beauty of media queries. You can start styling your content, right, based on screen sizes. Or you can start loading specific rules based on screen size. It helps you make those content decisions. So instead of just making it purple, I want to do something interesting. Let's make the width 100%. So what this should do, this should enable us to, have everything stack. If all the sections go to 100% width, doesn't even matter if they're floating, they just won't have enough room to sit next to each other, so they should stack. So let me go ahead and save that. And let me go back and check and see what happens here. We're gonna run into like one bug here, but we'll talk through it. All right, so here we go. No rules, no rules, no rules, no rules. Boom. 1, 2, 3, they stacked. And then we still had our 2 sections on the bottom that are still 50%. But it looks like we have a decent mobile layout here, right? The top 3 sections have stacked. The bottom 2 are kind of still there. So we got to fix those last 2. The reason why that last one didn't work is because the specificity is still too great. That has a specificity of 10. This only had a specificity of 1. So even though you're inside of a media query, specificity is still at play. So if we want those last two sections to also be with 100%, we have to apply that rule to that class as well. So what I'm going to do is, instead of writing a whole other rule, I'm just going to use that comma again to apply the rule not only to sections, but also things that have the bottom class as well. So let me go ahead and save that. Let me go back to the browser. Let me refresh. And now when I shrink it, no rules are being applied. No rules are being applied. Once I hit 600, boom, 600 for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of our sections now are 100% width. And this looks like a decent mobile layout, right? Like the cool thing about mobile is that you don't have a lot of horizontal space, but you have pretty much unlimited vertical space because you can scroll. So by making everything full width and stacking, you're on your way to a decent mobile layout. Cool. And when we go back, that rule disappears once we go above 600. So now you can have a series of these media queries at different screen sizes, and different rules will apply at those different sizes. So if we go to boston.com, what they might have is very simple. Is when they get to around here, what they're going to do is they're going to do display none on that column. So they have a media query that says, all right, when the screen gets to this side, display none on that column. And when you do display none, it removes it from the document. So they had display none on that column. Then they had another media query for here where you display none on that column. And if we go even smaller, eventually they have the same rule that we just made where everything becomes 100% width. So the cool thing is you can start applying these media queries to make good content decisions and help make your site responsive. Whew, I know it's a quick tour through responsiveness, but like I said, on Saturday, we'll spend more time building up media queries, getting a little bit of practice in. I'd much rather do this live. That way I can answer all of your questions and make sure things are sinking in. This is just kind of a speed run so that folks can kind of get a preview because we weren't able to stream tonight, unfortunately. Cool. Let's keep pushing. Let's go back to the slides. All right. There's one more important addition to the template. And this important addition to the template is this meta viewport. We're going to take this meta viewport and we're going to put it in our HTML. So let's go to our HTML. I'm going to go to my index.html and I'm going to put the meta viewport in here. And what this is doing is it's saying, hey, the width of the viewport, like the browser window, like the thing you can see, make that relative to the device, right? So that makes it so that the viewport we're looking at is the width of the device, whether that's a mobile phone, a tablet, or a desktop. This is going to make your code work well. Even if you take the same code and put it on a mobile phone, it's going to run smoothly. If you just did this max width, min width, and you tried putting it on the code running on a browser and a mobile phone, it might not work. It might not recognize that device width. So we put that device width there so that our media queries work well across not only being on a desktop, but mobile phones, tablets, everything. Then this other thing here, this initial scale 1 is really important. What this initial scale enables you to do is to manage the pinch and zoom, right? So if somebody has maybe say a visual impairment where they need to pinch and make the screen size stretch, this enables them to do that stretching. You should never set this to no. If you set this initial scale equal to no, what's going to happen is folks won't have the ability to scroll, or I mean not have the ability to scroll, to zoom in and make things bigger so that they can aid themselves with their visual impairments. Sometimes designers ask to turn this on so that you can preserve the experience, but it absolutely shatters accessibility and you should never change that. Cool. It's a lot of content, folks. We're power hour here. All right. How can we make this responsive? I'm actually going to save this as your homework. I'm going to ask you to do this and come on Saturday with this done. If I wanted to make this responsive, I'd probably do the same thing we just did, where I would stack these 3 elements. So what I would love for you to do is to start from scratch. Okay, start from scratch. Open up a fresh template. All right, open up a fresh template. Get this layout done regular, like just regular HTML, CSS. Get the nice layout. It's full. It's on your entire laptop. And then what I want you to do is I want you to write the media query to make this a good mobile layout. So probably you're just going to stack those sections. I'm going to ask you to do that. We'll go over it together on Saturday. All right. Promise you we talk a little bit about Flexbox. So Flexbox is pure magic. We got a few new layout systems over the years. For the longest time, folks relied on things like inline, even way back tables. Then we had float, and float was the predominant layout tool for a long time. But it has a lot of quirks, and it doesn't really have a lot of quirks, and it really doesn't make it easy. You got to do all the calculations yourself. Flexbox really kind of changed all that. And for a long time, you were kind of in limbo. Folks didn't know whether or not they could use Flexbox, where they could use some of the newer things like grid. And that's where a website like Can I Use comes into play. As these new features come out, you want to know if they work well across every browser. You wouldn't want to have moved on from floats to Flexbox or grid unless you know you had good coverage. And so the funny thing is, if you actually look at what's the most searched features, it's Flexbox and CSS grid. So if I click on Flexbox, what you're going to see is that it has 98% coverage across every browser. It doesn't work on really older versions of IE, and it doesn't work on Opera Mobile, but for every other browser, Flexbox works. So unless you're unfortunately tied to making Flexbox work in IE 6 through 9, you can use it. Right, so as long as you don't have to support those like really ancient versions of Internet Explorer, you're free to use Flexbox as much as you want to your heart's content, and it's going to work across all the browsers. If you go back a few years, this might not have been as true. And if we go back and we look at CSS Grid, which we'll touch on maybe next class, you can see it has a little bit less global compatibility, but it's pretty dang close. There are slightly more browsers that it doesn't support. So I use Can I Use to figure out whether or not I can use these like new features without running into trouble. Like, will I have to figure out workarounds when my code doesn't work on these older browsers? But I feel comfortable using Flexbox now. I feel comfortable using Grid across all my users, and so I use them. Let me show you some magic of Flexbox. So Flexbox is a one-dimensional layout model. It's going to enable you to lay out things either as a row or as a column. And one of my favorite articles like of all time for anything front-end related is this complete guide to Flexbox by CSS Tricks. This is where this image comes from. And what they do is they show you all the things you need to know for how Flexbox works and all the keywords that it comes with. You're going to find that in Flexbox, instead of having to like do calculations and things like that, there's probably just a word for what you want to do. Like if you want all the things to center, it's centered. If you want things like in a row, but you want some space in between, it's space in between. If you want like equal space going around, it's space around. So it's like, yes, you have to learn some new terminology, but there's no guesswork. You use the word and it just works. It's magic. So let me show you an example of Flexbox. Just so you see it in action. I'm going to close these two that I have open. Let me save this just so it's saved. I don't know which one it was. And let's go ahead and open up the Flexbox example code. So here we go. Putting in Atom. Flexbox really works well when elements are contained, right? So it really helps you lay out things that are inside of a container. So I have a pretty common layout that we've done. I have 3 sections inside of a main, and I have 2 sections inside of my bottom. Remember, I want those 3 sections in the main to be like 33% and sitting next to each other, and I want those 2 sections in the bottom to be 50% and sitting next to each other. But the cool thing about Flexbox is I won't even need to do any of this math. It's just going to work. It's going to be magic. It's going to blow your mind. Let me blow your mind. Let's go to the CSS. I'm going to come down here to layout. I'm going to do my normal header and my normal footer. And we're going to do our lovely height. Let's do 100 pixels. And then let's do our border just so we can see it. 1 pixel, solid black. Cool. Then I'm going to target all my sections. I'm going to target all my sections. Let's give all the sections a height of 200 pixels. And let's give them a border as well. All right, so now all my sections should have a border and they should all have a height. Now, if we go ahead, we can do something called display flex. I'm going to put display flex on my two containers, main, and then my other container was this section that has the class of bottom. So on main and bottom, I am going to put a display flex. All right, display flex. Woo. Cool. So now I've started to implement the flexbox, and then what I'm going to say for all my sections is I want them to take up one space each. So I'm going to say flex 1. So what's going to happen is each of my sections are going to take up one space, and my main and my bottom are display flex. So what's going to happen is in main, where there's 3 sections, we should say 3 separate ones, each taking up one space. And then the bottom, we should see 2, each taking up one space. So let's save this, and I'm going to open it in the browser. Boom, the layout's done. That's it. Mind blown. I didn't have to calculate widths. I didn't have to do any floating. I didn't do any wild stuff. It just works. That's the magic of, I got to go back to this picture. Magic, right? It's magic. It blows my mind. It just made that so quick. Let's look at the code here, folks. I didn't calculate any widths. I didn't do any floating. I just made the containers have a display of flex, and then I display a flex, and I said, you know what? Each thing take up 1. So when we look at the HTML, 1, 2, 3, if they're each taking up 1, we know they're going to be like 33 something. And then if there's just 2 sections each taking up 1, they're going to be 50% by default. So we don't have to calculate these widths. We just say, hey, take up 1 element each and have them all be flexing. And so this like changes the game when it comes to layout. It's so much faster. It's so much cleaner. And once you start learning all the other keywords, you can start doing really fun stuff, putting equal margins around everything, justifying to one side or the other. It just makes your life a lot easier when it comes to layout. So we started with floats. I like to introduce flex. And we'll talk a little bit about Flex and CSS Grid on Saturday as well. So we'll walk through more examples together of how to do all this, some really fun stuff that I like to show off. Maybe we'll walk through the previous layouts we did with Float using all Flexbox. So if you're having fun, you should definitely join me on Saturday. I'm going to get all the internet issues figured out. I really appreciate you sticking with me. Let's go back to the slides real quick just to introduce the homework. The homework is to work through this website, flexboxfroggy.com, and then I want you to watch Independence Day. Yes, the movie Independence Day with Will Smith. It's going to be very important for one of our examples come Tuesday, because next week, folks, we're starting JavaScript. So hopefully you got some value from here. Once again, I'm really sorry that we couldn't get the internet to work and the streaming kind of tanked a little bit. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I know it's very much fast because I'm not answering questions. I wanted to keep it as short as possible just because I know folks are going to watch it on their own. As you're working through this video, ask questions in Discord. I'm happy to answer questions as you're working through. If you like the video, give it a like just so more folks can see it. If you haven't followed me here on YouTube yet, please go ahead and give me a follow here on YouTube. Once I get to 1,000 followers, I get to unlock some stuff, and I think that'd be really cool. And I'll see you hopefully all on Twitch on Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to learn a little bit more, work through a lot of this stuff here. And then next week, starting live on Twitch at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to jump into JavaScript, folks. I'm really excited for you to get your feet wet with your first programming language. And hope you all have a great night and a great weekend. Cheers.